Folks, running backs are dropping like flies, and it's up to us to adapt. We've got our established names and some newcomers, so let's jump into it. Here are your Week 7 running back rankings. Austin Ekeler had a tough performance in his first week back from injury. He got his helmet knocked off in a pregame scuffle and was only able to put up 10.2 fantasy points on 18 total touches. I'm not too concerned with Ekeler having a poor performance against a very impressive Dallas defensive front. He got 6 targets and again led all backs with 107 of them last season. He's got that profile in an offense that is now missing Mike Williams, meaning higher usage for Ekeler. He's the only running back who, when healthy, is consistently equal to or better than McCaffrey as a receiver in terms of volume and overall productivity in that category. It's a tough matchup this week considering the Chiefs allow the 5th least amount of fantasy points to running backs, but with injuries, buys, and the whole 9 yards, I'm not betting against Austin Ekeler here. Try again. Travis Etienne is the volume king in fantasy football right now. He's at a league-high 113 rushes so far, and is also top 10 among running backs with 24 targets on the season. In 5 of the 6 games he has played so far, Etienne has seen at least 20 touches. He's averaging 4 yards per carry on the season, and has already matched his 5 touchdowns scored from 2022 in less than half the time, all of which have been on the ground so far. The Saints allow 3.9 yards per carry, which is middle of the pack, and the game is a toss-up at the moment in terms of who's favored. If Trevor Lawrence is in the game, the Jags have a better chance at winning and could end up running the clock out, so more rushes for Etienne. If Trevor Lawrence is not in the game, maybe they just lean on their workhorse back from the get-go. Either way, I think it's a great opportunity for him against New Orleans. Kenneth Walker III has been reliable and steadily has climbed up these rankings. He comes off of a 22-touch performance in a loss to the Bengals, and the man has now scored a touchdown in 4 straight games. Great signs for Walker. He is 3rd among backs in broken tackles at the moment with 9, which is a phenomenal sign if the offensive line were to falter. Seattle is favored at home by 8 points, and I would expect them to run the ball a ton in the second half, a decent amount if that is how things pan out, especially against an Arizona team that's allowing 4.5 yards per carry. That's bottom 10 in the NFL. Almost on command, DeAndre Swift got involved in an area that we haven't seen him get too involved in with this year. The guy was the primary pass catching back in Detroit during his time last year. But heading into last week, he had just 17 targets through 5 games. Not optimal. Well, he had 8 receptions on a season-high 10 targets in last week's loss against the Jets, showing us that even when this team isn't winning, Swift should play a pivotal role in this offensive game plan. Swift is 3rd among running backs, tied with Walker III in broken tackles with 9 of them so far. This is going to be a heavyweight matchup between the Eagles and Dolphins, but Philly does run the ball more often than all but 2 teams. Expect the chances for Swift to keep on rolling in. Josh Jacobs still has not been great efficiency-wise, and that's an understatement. He's sitting just below 3 yards per carry on the season, but the bright side, he is leading all running backs with 35 targets so far. The man is tracking to beat around 100 of those on the season. It's definitely offsetting the lack of production on the ground. He's facing a Chicago Bears defense that has only allowed 3.5 yards per carry, but Vegas is a 3-point favorite even on the road in what will probably be a battle between backup quarterbacks, which should be interesting. With the combination of the Raiders likely having to lean on their running back with Jimmy G out, and the fact that they are favorites in this game, I love Josh Jacobs here at number 5 overall. Isaiah Pacheco had 15 touches in each of his last 4 games, and he's averaging 4.5 yards per carry on a Chiefs team that is leaning more and more into the run than in years past. He now gets to face off against a Chargers defense that Kansas City has absolutely owned in the Patrick Mahomes era. The Chargers defense is allowing 25 points per game to opposing teams, despite their heavy investment in building a strong defense. Combine that with the expected game script, given how dominant the Chiefs have been in these divisional matchups, and I love Isaiah Pacheco in this spot at number 6 overall. If we've learned anything in fantasy this year, it's that Miami running backs are going to be putting up some explosive performances. Raheem Mostert has a career-high 11 touchdowns already on the season, and he's played in just 6 games. I just read an article about 2023 possibly being the year of the old or veteran player, and it's kind of interesting when you have examples like Raheem Mostert, Tyreek Hill, and Adam Thielen all at the top of their respective positions in fantasy at age 30 or older. Mostert is in the top 10 among qualified backs in the NFL at 5.7 yards per carry currently. We've seen him hit 15 touches in 4 of the first 6 weeks. Again, volume was a aspect of concern coming into this season, but so far, with Devon Achane down for a few weeks, the spotlight is going to be on Mostert. I will say it's going to be important to monitor who the primary backup ends up being in Miami, considering that Mostert has a pretty serious injury history where he has only played in 2 full seasons so far, and Jeff Wilson Jr. is on his way off the IR, so monitor that for sure. Bijan Robinson is no less talented or able than he was just a few weeks ago, but all of a sudden the Falcons have started throwing the ball more and more. They were the most run-heavy team in the NFL just a couple of weeks ago, and now they throw the ball 55% of the time despite Desmond Ridder's struggles. Robinson did see 18 touches last week and has stayed relatively involved throughout the season, but he has only cleared 15 rushes on one occasion. He is below 3.5 yards per carry in each of his last 2 games, but Robinson is second in the NFL among running backs in targets at 32. He does face a Tampa Bay defense allowing the 10th least amount of fantasy points to the position, but Atlanta has been at their best when they lean on Bijan. We'll see if they do it here. Aaron Jones has been virtually absent from the fantasy world since he exploded in week 1. He exploded against the Bears in the first game of the season, but since then he has either been out due to injury or on a very restrictive snap count. He is in the perfect spot. I've said this time and time again. We said it a month and a half ago. Not only is Jordan Love a young, essentially rookie signal caller under center, but all of a sudden the weapons on this offense outside of the backfield are very young this year. This Green Bay offense is in search of an identity, and I'd say leaning on somebody who is now a 7-year veteran, averaging over 5 yards per carry in his career, is probably a safe route in Aaron Jones. Jordan Love has been struggling in the last couple of weeks, and now I think having someone back who is there for either a handoff or a high percentage throw in the form of a dump-off pass will be just what the doctor ordered for Green Bay's offense. Not to mention, Denver, their opposition, allows the most fantasy points to running backs so far. After logging 28 touches and still failing to hit 100 yards from scrimmage against a Bills team that has typically given up a lot to running backs this year, Saquon Barkley is now listed as questionable in the middle of the week. In this week's divisional matchup, Barkley faces a Commanders team allowing greater than 4.5 yards per carry, which is promising. His pass catching involvement, considering he has 13 targets in just 3 games so far, will save him when the going gets tough efficiency-wise, which we saw last week. If Daniel Jones is out, which he is also listed as questionable at the moment, I would expect this Giants team to lean even more on Barkley, considering Tyrod Taylor doesn't bring as much rushing production as Jones to the table. I have no complaints about Alvin Kamara right now, all right? Absolutely none. The man has 75 touches in 3 games and has been every bit as involved, if not more involved, when you look at what we've seen from him in the past. He's averaging 25 touches per game and nearly 80 scrimmage yards per contest as well. Kamara does have a short week here as he gets set to take on Jacksonville. When somebody is averaging over 7 targets per game on fresh legs, though, I don't think I can find any justifiable reason to keep him out of your lineup. He's in here at number 11. Brian Robinson Jr. is up next and has struggled a little as of late, I will say. The Commanders' main back has failed to surpass 45 yards on the ground in each of the last 3 weeks now. He did see only 12 touches last week and hasn't seen 15 or more opportunities since week 4, so almost a month ago. But the opposition is a little easier this time around. Robinson Jr. faces off against the Giants defense, giving up 5.1 yards per carry, one of the highest rates in the league. If they continue to struggle the way they have and Washington can get up on New York in the game, Robinson Jr. should see even more chances. Week 3 of the Welcome Back Jonathan Taylor campaign is here, and we saw some promising signs in week 2. We've seen a jump from him being in for just 15% of snaps to 42% in week 6. Taylor was not efficient on the ground at all in the last game. That's the bad news, as he took 8 rushes for just 19 yards, but the 5 receptions for 56 yards with Gardner Minshew, the Colts quarterback for the rest of the season now, saved his performance in fantasy. It's a small sample size, but we are seeing a similar scenario to what we have with Josh Jacobs. At times, that receiving volume may be the only thing Jonathan Taylor owners can rely on if they want a quality performance. We also need to understand that Zach Moss isn't just going to vanish, folks. He's been averaging nearly 5 yards per carry and had 13 touches last week, with 6 of those being receptions. Zach Moss is still going to make his presence known even when Jonathan Taylor is 100% back. He has been phenomenal. I'd put JT in the top 10 normally, but Moss's productivity combined with the fact that this opposition in the Browns allows just 3.5 yards per attempt tells me this could be a tougher day at the office for Taylor. Still got him here at 13. We got a resurgence from Ramondre Stevenson. Thank goodness. Now, the Patriots look horrible. Do not get it twisted. If they keep this performance up, they're easily operating in Marvin Harrison draft territory, which I guess do with that information what you will. But Ramondre Stevenson was beginning to enter a territory where I felt like Ezekiel Elliott had a shot at his job. This last week, he extinguished some of my worries. Stevenson was out there for 65% of snaps. That's the highest amount we've seen from him since week 3. He had 70 yards from scrimmage on just 15 touches. And on top of that, Stevenson got into the end zone. There's always some reassurance when you get a touchdown. His next matchup can be a favorable one if the game is close. Buffalo is a heavy favorite over New England, but they are allowing the second highest amount of yards per attempt on the ground at 5.4. If Josh Allen operates with any limitations, maybe this game ends up being more competitive, and as a result, it's a more balanced attack for the Patriots, which means Stevenson gets the ball more. There's a lot of talk about Kareem Hunt being fantasy relevant again after he saw north of 15 touches and got into the end zone against a tough 49ers defensive front last week. But just because Kareem Hunt is back, that doesn't mean Jerome Ford is out of the picture all of a sudden. He was super productive last week against one of the toughest teams to run the ball against in San Francisco. He saw 50% of snaps, Ford did, 19 touches with 17 of those on the ground. We haven't seen as much receiving involvement out of Ford as we'd like to, so that obviously means he's probably half, if not a full tier higher in standard and PPR leagues. James Cook was inefficient a pair of weeks ago, and last week he was losing red zone rushes to Latavius Murray and had no receptions for just 7.1 points in a standard PPR format. Now, we have seen Buffalo commit a little more to the run as of late, as they're keeping the ball on the ground 44% of the time. This is middle of the pack amongst NFL teams. I'd say Cook is a great buy low option at the moment. He was still in for around half of the team's snaps in last week's contest. He averaged north of 5 yards per carry for the third time in the last 5 weeks. It's just that receiving involvement right now and the red zone touches, something we've seen him do fine with except for a couple of weeks as of late. He saw 13 targets in the first 3 games and has averaged around 2 per game since, so we just gotta watch it. Alexander Mattison had us pretty worried in the first month, I'm not gonna lie, but now he's had 15 touches in 3 of the last 4 weeks. Cam Akers has been brought in as what seems to be just a change of pace back, which is good news for Mattison owners. We've only seen Mattison in for under 70% of Viking snaps on 2 occasions, and here's a huge stat to highlight. Alexander Mattison has the most red zone targets in the NFL among running backs right now. Justin Jefferson is obviously out, leaving more looks open for guys like Mattison, but let's look at the upcoming matchup. San Francisco, his opposition, allows 4 yards per carry, but they are favored by a decent amount considering the best receiver in the NFL won't be playing this game, obviously, so Vegas took that into account. That's when you've got to start asking yourself, how likely is it if Minnesota's down by a decent amount that they go check down heavy as opposed to really throwing the ball down the field if they want to work themselves back into this game? I cautiously have Jahmyr Gibbs here at number 18. Yes, David Montgomery is likely out again after being absent during the Lions walkthrough practice on Wednesday, but now Gibbs himself is questionable with a hamstring injury. He was a limited participant on Wednesday. So again, folks, monitor this. We've seen some efficiency from Jahmyr Gibbs. That's really never been the issue. The story all year has been overall usage. Now it looks like, yes, if Gibbs does get the green light this Sunday, we could see more of that pass catching upside that we're accustomed to. The guy has 5 or more targets in 2 of 4 games played so far. But if he's limited or even out, Craig Reynolds looks like an immediate must-add off of waivers and is honestly fringe top 30 in my rankings right away. Javonte Williams had a decent return if you're a Broncos fan. This guy took 10 rushes for 51 yards and was efficient in his return, but he didn't even have a single target, and that really doesn't do much fantasy-wise, obviously. It's looking more and more like a situation where Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin are the designated receiving backs on this team, which would heavily mitigate Javonte Williams' upside in fantasy. Green Bay is among the bottom third of teams in terms of yards per carry allowed, so he does have that going for him. The fact that Williams is on the 7th most pass-heavy team in the NFL, and he isn't even involved in that aspect, that's super alarming to me. Denver is struggling, working from behind a lot, and not throwing the ball to Javonte Williams. Not the best news. We'll see if that changes now that he's 2 weeks out from injury. Gonna watch this one closely, that's for sure. I have Roschon Johnson here at number 20 with the potential to rise, but we've got a lot of wild cards in Chicago right now. They were once down to their 4th option at running back. They've tried just about everybody out back there, with D'Onta Foreman impressing last week despite the loss. And now Justin Fields is out, so that was a lot to absorb. I'm curious to see how willing Luke Getsy will be to give Tyson Bagent the keys to this offense now that he has a full week to prepare. And from there, I'm interested to see just how many screens and dump-off passes are built in. As it stands, Chicago is 9th in the NFL in running back target share, just over 22%. Roschon Johnson has caught 10 of his 11 targets, but has dropped off in receiving usage since seeing 6 targets in week 1 against Green Bay. He's efficient, but he hasn't had more than 8 rushes in a game so far. The surrounding factors say he should get more touches and will do well with them, but again, we've got to see this unfold before elevating him much more. I can't just rely on a scenario because it looks good on paper. Rachaad White has not been the most exciting of fantasy running back options. He has cleared 60 rushing yards just once so far this season, and it's nearly November. He's been below 4 yards per carry and has receiving involvement, but it's nothing major. The frustrating part is that he's out there for a lot of snaps, but relative to the amount of snaps he's out there for, he's not being used much. There hasn't been a game yet this season where White has been in for less than 70% of snaps, but he hardly got the ball in Tampa's loss to Detroit. The Falcons are a tall task. That's the opposition this week, specifically with Calais Campbell on that defensive line. However, Tampa is favored by a field goal over the AFC South rivals, so maybe we get some game script help here. I'm sure I sound like a broken record at this point, but Kyren Williams going down continues this theme of major contributors, and it felt like he was just getting started, suffering an injury. Williams is out. It seemed to be wise to pivot to the next option in Zach Evans, who unfortunately we don't have a ton of information on. He has just 4 touches for 10 yards this year, and it is his rookie year. He did average 6.9 yards per carry in college and finished his career up at Ole Miss, showcasing his explosive upside. In his prospect profile, I see there's some hip mobility issues that limit his route running ability, and he's got some fumble issues as well. That's part of the reason he consistently lost usage to other competing backs on his teams. But hey, we've got a shot at getting one of the 32 starting running backs in this league. Let's not waste it. Kareem Hunt is questionable with a thigh injury at the moment, so keep an eye on that, of course. If healthy, he's up next and is looking like he still has enough left in the tank to be that versatile, but somewhat reliable secondary option out of the Browns backfield. The only difference now is that instead of backing up Nick Chubb, it'll be someone who may not have as firm of a hold on the primary running back spot in Jerome Ford. Hunt looks to be more involved in the receiving game than Ford is, which is ultimately the only reason he really makes my list here. He has seen an increase in snaps in each of the first 3 weeks this season since he rejoined the Cleveland Browns, as that mark was all the way up to 37% last week. A.J. Dillon is here just making this list based on how limited Aaron Jones could be this weekend, so monitor that as well. Not to mention, Dillon did just have by far his best performance this season with 78 rushing yards and a touchdown to his name. As mentioned before, the Broncos are allowing the most fantasy points to running backs, so we got to jump on that. And Green Bay is favored in this game, so I'd say they lean on the run later on in that contest if all goes how it's expected to. The Steelers offense is hard to watch, but so far, Jaylen Warren has seen an increase in involvement and in turn, productive games fantasy-wise, which we're a fan of. He's second on the Steelers in targets with 20 of them so far and is averaging right at 10 points per contest in standard PPR formats. That puts him at 29th among running backs currently. Warren is facing a Rams team allowing over 120 rushing yards per contest. If he can get a piece of that on an offense that already finds other ways to keep him involved, he could climb this list pretty easily. Fringe players just beyond the top 25 for Week 7. Zach Moss, Gus Edwards, Deonta Foreman, Jaleel McLaughlin, and Tyler Algier. Thank you so much for watching as always. Please feel free to ask me any questions you have in the comment section below. Like and subscribe if we're helping you out in fantasy as we head into Week 7, and we will see you in the next video.